government spending bill approved by the House last night. That measure would fund the federal government for another 2 weeks and proposes about $4 billion in cuts. After that, more debate on a patent overhaul bill. Amendments and votes are expected throughout the day. And we go live now to the Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Lord God of the nations, your word declares righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. May our lawmakers and the citizens of this great land strive to please you through right living and submission to your will. Help us to flee from the dead-end path of transgression that leads to national ruin. Enable us to turn from thoughts, words, and deeds that violate your precepts and commands. Lord, fill our senators with a hunger for holiness and a hatred of evil. Enlarge their influence and use them for your glory. Reinforce them by the constant assurance of your presence. We pray in your great name. Amen.
Please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., March 2, 2011, to the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Kirsten E. Gillibrand, a senator from the state of New York, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Madam President.
The Majority Leader.
Following any leader remarks, the Senate will proceed to morning business until 11 a.m. today. During that period of time, senators will be permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each. The Republicans will control the first 30 minutes. The majority will control the next 30 minutes. The remaining time until 11 will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or the designees, with the majority controlling the final half. At 11, the Senate will proceed to vote on passage of the 2-week continuing resolution. Upon disposition of that matter, the Senate will resume consideration of the American Invents Act. Additional roll call votes in relation to amendments to the American Invents Act are expected to occur throughout the day. Madam President, we've worked for weeks now in moving forward on this funding measure for the country. Democrats have said for weeks now that we're committed to working with all sides to find a middle ground that helps us move forward and move toward a fiscally responsible budget for the rest of the year. Yesterday, the House acted, and soon the Senate will act as well. Our priorities are really twofold. One, keeping the country running so essential services don't get interrupted. And certainly, they should not be interrupted at a time that we can least afford it. We have 2 more weeks to do this. We've heard today in the news, John McCain's chief economic advisor said if the Republicans continue going on the route that they've talked about doing, it'll eliminate 700,000 jobs in this struggling economy. Goldman Sachs issued a study yesterday indicating that would hurt the gross national product by up to 2%. That's devastating. So our priorities are twofold. One, keeping the country running so essential services don't get interrupted at a time we can least afford them. And two, equally as important, we need to lay the groundwork with a budget that invests in what works and cut what doesn't. We have to begin to bring down the deficit without forfeiting our future. This hasn't been an easy process. But we need to set aside partisan motivations and remember we work for the American people, not our political parties. I'm pleased the Republicans have agreed with the President's suggested cuts and dropped all those riders. Provisions meant only to send messages, only to create unnecessary hurdles and kill progress. We're going to keep working toward a solution. This time around, it may not include everything Democrats want or everything Republicans want, but we need to have a compromise which will be part of an ongoing conversation, just like our overarching priority when we budget, that we must live within our means. This next step recognizes that we must do the best with what we have. Today we'll also finish or work toward finishing the patent reform bill. It's called America Invest, a jobs bill. It's a priority. We have to finish this matter, and this patent legislation is important in returning America's economy to a position of strength. As we speak, there are 750,000 patent applications that are stuck in the patent office because they don't have enough people to do the work. And it's true to Democrats' agenda from day one, creating jobs and ensuring America can compete in the 21st century's global economy. Now, Mr. President, I see my friend here on the floor from Oklahoma. A couple of things that he's done in recent days have been extremely important. First of all, that the money that is collected in the patent office should be used in the patent office. I also think that it's important that people recognize that we have an entity around here called the General Accounting Office, which is really the watchdog of Congress. It's an important entity. It's available to both Democrats and Republicans. My friend from Oklahoma wrote a letter, as he has the right to do, in a couple different areas, finding where there was duplication of services. And they studied this and came back with, I think, some things that we need to direct our attention to. The duplication of different entities around here have become really untoward. And so I commend and applaud my friend from Oklahoma in helping us go down this path that I think is going to be extremely important for us to work our way out of the problems that we have. I know, Mr. President, that we have a lot of work to do, and that's important that we do that work. We're going to get this spending thing out of the way today, and then we will have, as I've indicated, a little over 2 weeks to work something out on a long-term basis. The President has said that he would like a longer period of time. We couldn't work that out with our friends on the Republican side. I hope that they don't need a government shutdown, and I'm not referring to my friends here in the Senate, but the House. I hope they don't need a government shutdown to do what is necessary for this country. I think we should avoid that shutdown, and we can avoid that shutdown and still recognize that there are costs that need to be cut from our government spending. It can't all come from our domestic discretionary side of the ledger. There's Pentagon monies that can be saved. There's other programs that have been untouchable in past years that we need to look at for a long-term solution to the country's problems. Mr. President, I ask consent the Senate proceed to calendar number 15, S-Res 81.
Clerk will report.
Calendar number 15, Senate Resolution 81, authorizing expenditures by committees of the Senate and so forth.
Without objection,
Thank you, Madam President.
Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask consent the resolution be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be laid on the table. There be no intervening action or debate, and any statements related to this resolution be placed in the record at the appropriate place as if read.
Without objection. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President.
Republican Leader.
I ask consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
I'd like to start this morning by acknowledging the progress that's been made this week. Senator Reid's predictions the Senate will follow the House in approving a $4 billion cut for the current fiscal year is a small step, but it is indeed a step in the right direction. This is a long-awaited acknowledgement by Democrats in Congress that we have a spending problem around here. It's hard to believe when we're spending $1.6 trillion more than we're taking in a single year that it would take this long to cut a penny in spending, but it's progress nonetheless. It's also encouraging to hear the White House say yesterday they'd be supportive of a 4-week CR with $8 billion in cuts. So it's encouraging that the White House and congressional Democrats now agree that the status quo won't work, that the bills we pass must include spending reductions. Beyond that, the GAO report, which Senator Coburn requested, we all saw yesterday, makes it pretty clear to me, at least, that there are a lot of very obvious targets for additional cuts. I want to thank Senator Coburn for requesting the report. First of all, I don't think most Americans are surprised to hear that Washington is wasting so much money. I do think some people might be surprised at how rampant it is, and frankly, the sheer idiocy of some of the waste we've been tolerating around here. I can't imagine anyone in the Senate voting against a bill that would return to taxpayers money that we're wasting on the bloated and duplicative programs outlined in this report. Programs which, as ABC put it, are chewing up billions of dollars in funding every year. It would be an embarrassment and a double indictment of Congress to not act on this. The report is damning, but it comes at a good time. Right when we're looking to make cuts both parties can agree on, we learn that we've got a roadmap here. More than 100 programs dealing with surface transportation issues, 82 programs monitoring teacher quality, 80 programs for economic development, 47 programs for job training, 17 different programs for disaster preparedness. And here's my favorite, 56 programs to help people understand finances. How do you like that? 56 programs to help people understand finances. If that isn't an emblem, if that isn't the emblem of government waste, I don't know what is. We're going to be $1.6 trillion in the red this year alone. And not only do we think we're in a position to teach other people about financial literacy, we've got 56 overlapping programs to do it. If we're going to create the conditions for private sector job growth in this country, this is a good place to start. We've got to stop spending money that we don't have on more government and calling that progress. Democrats have tried that. They've borrowed $3 trillion over the past 2 years to expand the size and scope of government. And what's it gotten us? 3 million more lost jobs. So we've made some progress this week, a very small step perhaps, but one in the right direction. At the same time, the White House took another step backward this week by failing to fulfill another responsibility. According to the 2003 Medicare Modernization Act, the President is required to submit a reform proposal for Medicare if more than 45% of the program's finances are being drawn from the government's General Revenue Fund instead of a fund specifically set aside for Medicare for 2 years in a row. As of today, that's the situation. As of today, that's the situation. The President is supposed to have taken care of this, but he hasn't. Putting on this responsibility, he's punting on this responsibility just as he punted on other reforms in the 10-year budget plan he released last month. Washington's unsustainable spending on entitlements like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security must be addressed now. Now. And we'll never be able to assure the stability and solvency of any of them without presidential leadership. In this case, that's not my opinion. The law actually requires it. Now, just one more word on the continuing resolution. Once we pass this stopgap spending measure, we'll be right back at it again 2 weeks from now, unless we can reach an agreement on a long-term measure before then. The House has sent us a bill that will keep the government funded through the end of the year. At the moment that this next continuing resolution expires, we'll be nearly halfway through the fiscal year. The House bill contains a much-needed defense spending bill for the rest of the year. Many important programs have been delayed, and Secretary Gates has made clear that further delay will harm combat readiness. So there are many compelling reasons for us to reach agreement on a longer-term bill. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 11 a.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the Republicans controlling the first 30 minutes, the majority controlling the next 30 minutes, and the remaining time until 11 a.m. equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the final half.
Madam President,
Senator from Oklahoma.
I ask unanimous consent to speak in morning business up to 20 minutes.
Without objection.
I'd also ask the Chair to advise me when I've consumed 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Well, I thank the leader, the majority leader and the minority leader both for their comments on this report. It's important for the American people to know this is the first of 3 reports we're going to receive. This report just covers what the GAO has looked at in the last 4 to 5 years. It truly only covers about a third of the federal government. And I'm talking discretionary programs, not mandatory programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And in here is at least $100 billion in savings if we would do our job. And we're going to have a large debate over the next 2 weeks of funding the government for the next 6 months of this fiscal year and what the funding is going to be like in the next year. If I was sitting at home, a regular American looking at us and having read this report, the question I'd ask is, why is there going to be any debate at all? The GAO has given us a roadmap. They've said, here's where $100 billion, those are my numbers, not theirs, of savings that can come on an annualized basis on the first third of the discretionary side of the federal government. The discretionary programs of this government are 24% greater now than they were 2 years ago. And what the challenge that we face before us as a nation is a far greater challenge than anything we've ever faced. And that sounds like a gigantic overstatement. But when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who is head of all our military, reporting to our civilian officials, says the greatest threat to this country is our debt, we ought to wake up and pay attention to it. When the average American, 75% of the Americans across this land, want the size of the federal government and its spending reduced. That's Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. What is lacking today is the leadership to define the problem for the American people so that we can come together as a nation and solve this greatest of all challenges before us. And let me spend a minute talking about what's going to happen if we don't solve it. You heard the minority leader, the senator from Kentucky, talk about the $1.65 trillion deficit this year. Today, the United States is borrowing money, on average, across everything that they borrow, for about 2%. The historical average at which we borrow money is around 6%. We're going to add over the next 2 years, if we don't change things drastically, and I'm talking drastically, we're going to add another $3.5 trillion to the debt, to bring us to almost $18 trillion worth of debt. Well, if you apply our historical interest rates to the debt, which we will be at in 2 or 3 years, there's no question about that, of 6% to $18 trillion, what you get is $1.08 trillion a year in interest costs. Now think about that. We spent $127 billion this last year on interest. And we're going to take $1 trillion. What happens if that happens? What that means is there's no discretionary budget. That means there's no money for the military, there's no money for education, there's no money for all the programs other than Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. That's the only thing that's left. And if that happens, our ability to borrow money in the international market will markedly decline. And the likelihood is that interest rates will go even higher than our historical average of 6%. So the time to call us together, the time for shared sacrifice, not for sacrifice's sake, but so we can restore a hope of prosperity for our nation, is now. It's not tomorrow, it's now. We're going to have a small bill on the floor that over the next 2 weeks will eliminate $4 billion by advancing terminations of programs that both President Bush and President Obama want to terminate, and eliminate $2.7 billion worth of earmarks that are inappropriate. $4 billion over 2 weeks. Our interest costs today and what we're borrowing is $3 billion a day was what we're borrowing that we don't have. Every day we go into the markets and borrow $3 billion. So over these 2 weeks, 14 days, we're going to borrow $42 billion. And we're only going to save $4 billion. You see the magnitude of the problem? We cannot continue to go in the direction we're going. And so the bill that the House sent us is a step in the right direction, but far less than what is needed based on the reality of what is in front of us. Every dollar this government spends, we borrow 40 cents of it. 40 cents. What do you think, as a 20-year-old individual out there, is going to see 20 years from now, the consequence of us going and the debt? Necessity is the mother of invention. We have a need now, as a nation, not as Republicans, Democrats, or Independents, as a nation, to come together and make the decisions that will put us on a course that guarantees a future for our kids and our grandkids. And the easiest way I know right now to take some of the sting out of the parochialism and the partisanship is for every member of this body in the House to become acutely aware of what this report says. The minority leader listed a few of the programs, but let me go through. Just sitting at home or sitting in your office, think about if any of this makes sense. 82 separate teacher training programs run by the federal government. 82? 82 separate sets of bureaucracies, sets of federal employees. None of these teacher programs, by the way, training programs, have a metric on them to evaluate whether or not they're successful. So when we're not successful, and I would question whether it's even a role for the federal government to be involved in teacher training. I can't find it in the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson couldn't find it in the Constitution. Roosevelt couldn't find it in the Constitution. Johnson couldn't find it in the Constitution. They all said so. We have quotes that state that. And yet we have 82 programs, none of which we know whether or not they're working. We have 47 job training programs, 44 of which overlap one another, some to the degree of 100%, some to the degree of 60%. We spend $18 billion a year on it, and not one of them has a measurement on whether or not it's effective. We have a great need in our country today to retrain people to available jobs. Yet we don't have any idea whether these are working. And if you go out and try to figure out how to get through these programs, you need another government program to help you figure out how to get through them. We have 20 offices with programs for homeless people. 20 different programs. At the federal level, again, if you read the Constitution and the enumerated powers, you find real difficulty in saying whether or not that's a federal responsibility versus a state. But yet we have 20 different separate programs for homeless people. How about one that works if, in fact, it's a responsibility of the federal government? We run 80 separate economic development programs, 80 of them. There's 80 different federal programs in 4 different cabinet agencies. We spend $6.5 billion a year, and what the GAO says is you can't say whether or not there's any economic development that's come out of the $6.5 billion. The Department of Transportation spends $58 billion on 100 separate programs run by 5 different agencies with 6,000 employees, with no idea whether that's the most efficient or effective way to do it, because nobody's ever put a metric on it. We have 30 separate food programs on food safety run by 15 different federal agencies. And we just added a whole bunch more with the last food safety bill, none of which consolidated anything, none of which had a metric on it, none of which perfected the idea. Food safety in terms of interstate transport is undoubtedly a federal responsibility. But how about an efficient and effective way to do that? How about one agency in the federal government that's responsible for food safety instead of 15? We have 18 domestic food and nutrition programs. We spend $62.5 billion, 11 of which we have no idea whether or not they're performing effectively. Well, the first question you might ask is, how in the world did we get all these programs? We got all these programs because somebody saw a need and thought they would solve that need. And they did so without the benefit of one of the #1 obligations of Congress, and that's to oversight the bureaucracy. We have all these complaints by those who favor the earmarking process that if we don't earmark it, then the federal agencies will spend the money where they are. Well, they forget one little clue in terms of the power of Congress. We have absolute power to oversight every branch of the federal government in terms of their effectiveness and their efficiency, and yet we haven't done it. The Congress hadn't done it. When it's run by Republicans, it wasn't done. When it's run by Democrats, it's not done. It's not a partisan issue. It's absolute laziness on our part, because it's far easier to write a new bill that solves the same problem that 80-some other programs do and not oversight the other to see what you really need to do. And so consequently, we answer the call, the humanitarian, compassionate call to fix something, but we've done it by treating symptoms rather than the disease. We have a real disease in our country today, and the disease is a cancer that will take away our freedom. And if you look back on history, all republics have fallen. The average age of a republic is 206 years. And how did they fail? What caused them to fail? If you read the history books and look at all of them, what you find is even though they might have been overrun by an enemy, the key factor that caused them to fail was fiscal every time. They lived beyond their means. Look at what's happening to us in the world today. The scope of our power militarily is being limited by our economic power because we are extremely far in debt. When you go to the lead economists that look at our economy, Ken Rogoff and Carmen Reinhart, and the book that they've written, It's Different This Time, what they tell us is our debt right now, not what's coming this next year, but just right now with the interest costs that we have today, is costing us 1% of GDP. And we're only going to grow at about 3.5% this year, which means if we didn't have this debt, we'd be growing at 4.5%. What does that mean? That means 1 million more people would have great paying jobs this year if we didn't have this debt. So there's a clarion call out there that's coming from America, not inside Washington. Fix the real problems. Thank you. Fix the real problem. As a physician, what I know is this. If I treat symptoms of a disease and not treat the real disease, what I do is ultimately make the disease much worse. I cover up the signs and symptoms of the disease. And the disease we have is the disease of not recognizing the very critical nature that you cannot, you never can live without your above and beyond your means without ultimately paying a greater price. You know, the difference between the federal government and most of the state governments and every family is when you've maxed out the credit card, it's maxed. You're not going to get another credit card company to give you more. You're going to either have to start paying or you're going to default on it. The question comes is, will we honor our true commitments? Will we make the hard decisions that are required to put us on a path for renewed prosperity? Will we take real information, which I've offered 70 amendments from this over the past 6 years, which have been voted down, and will we now start paying attention? Because ultimately, if we don't make decisions today that will control and set us on a path to prosperity, we're going to be in a position where our debt holders will make our decisions for us. That's when liberty declines. That's when American exceptionalism dies. That's when our destiny is taken from our hands. It should not be that way. And so I would again call on the President to lead this nation, to define the problem, the very real threat to our freedom it is, and to come forward, pull us together, and let's solve this problem with everybody recognizing everyone is going to sacrifice, but the sacrifice will create a future benefit that will be rewarded in the lives of our children and our grandchildren. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.
Senator Tom Coburn speaking on the floor of the Senate. And just a reminder, he was our guest this morning on Washington Journal. You can watch that segment online in our video library at cspan.org. The Senate today working on the couple of issues. They are working on the overhaul of the patent law, and also today primarily the CR, the continuing resolution that was passed in the House yesterday. It's a $4 billion spending cut. It would extend federal programs, spending for federal programs, another 2 weeks beyond the March 4th date, so through the 18th of March. Look for votes on that coming up at 11 o'clock Eastern.
Senator from Illinois.
Was consent to dispense with the quorum call?
Without objection.
Seek recognition.
Senator from Illinois.
Thank you. I rise to support this continuing resolution. As we know, the Senate is set to pass a short-term funding bill while negotiations continue on a longer-term funding bill for the rest of the year. The administration has presented us with a request also to fund the government next year and is expected to ask for an increase in the federal debt ceiling. Now, this legislation cuts about $4 billion, but up against our annual deficit or the total debt, it is but a micro drop in the budget. The federal government is on track to spend about $3.7 trillion this fiscal year, while taking in only $2.2 trillion in revenue. If we compared this to a middle-class example, it would be as if someone was spending $37,000 a year with an income of only $22,000. Replace thousand for trillion, and you get a good idea of how fiscally irresponsible the federal government has become. We have a $14 trillion debt, and as we all know now, we are borrowing 40 cents of every dollar that we spend. Clearly, there is a growing danger in the country to tremendous debt and runaway spending, and it's this resolution that will help, in a very small way, put us on the better track. I encourage us to use a multi-pronged approach as we move forward. We need to reverse the current spending trend of the Congress. We need to address long-term obligations and put statutory backstops into place to make sure it'll be very difficult for future Congresses to do what past Congresses have done. Now, as a very new member of the Senate Appropriations Committee, I'll be asking federal agencies to identify further programs and ways to reduce federal spending. Now, the administration has been on the right track in several key areas. They have proposed to cut or terminate almost 150 discretionary programs that would save about $21 billion, and defense programs that would save about $25 billion. But that savings should be put to reducing our total need to borrow and not pumped back into additional spending by the government. Additionally, we need to incorporate what we just learned from the Government Accountability Office about inefficient and duplicative areas of the federal budget. GAO's recommendations for consolidation and eliminating programs should be fully reviewed and in many places implemented for next year's budget. Now, Treasury Secretary Geithner will soon ask the Congress to increase the allowable federal debt a fourth time for the last 2 years. In my judgment, Congress should say no unless such an increase is coupled with new and dramatic anti-spending reforms that would make any future additions to our debt nearly impossible. While defaulting on not an option, Congress must tie future debt limit extension to reforms that produce a much smaller and smarter government. As Indiana's Governor Daniels has said, you will never know how much government you won't miss. And with that, Madam President, I yield back and would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The Senate in a period of morning business up to about 11 o'clock, and they'll take a vote on the continuing resolution. That's the bill that keeps the federal government running through March the 18th, the temporary spending measure for fiscal year 2011, passed in the House yesterday, a vote here in the U.S. Senate today at 11 o'clock, and then the Senate will resume work on the patent overhaul bill. Also on Capitol Hill today, the House is in, and they came in about 20 minutes ago or so, a couple of items on the House agenda today. And also on Capitol Hill for the second day in a row, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton testifying on the administration's 2012 foreign relations budget. She's before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and that's live now on our companion network, C-SPAN 3. News from the Supreme Court. The court today has ruled that the First Amendment protects the fundamentalist church members who mounted attention-getting anti-gay protests outside military funerals. This report from the Associated Press that the court voted 8-1 today in favor of the Westboro Baptist Church of Topeka, Kansas. The decision upheld an appeals court ruling that threw out a $5 million judgment to the father of a dead Marine who sued church members after they picketed his son's funeral. And by the way, on our website, cspan.org, you'll be able to link to the oral argument from that case that was held in the Supreme Court in the fall.
Senator from Vermont.
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Madam President, we face as a nation some of the most difficult circumstances that this country has faced since the Great Depression. Two of the major issues that we're facing is the collapse of the middle class, and simultaneously, while poverty increases and the middle class in this country disappears, we also find ourselves with a $14 trillion national debt and a $1.6 trillion deficit. And at this momentous moment in American history, the question arises as to how we, in fact, will deal with the deficit. Will we deal with it in a way that is fair and just, or will we, at a time when the gap between the very, very wealthy and everybody else is growing wider, will we, in fact, try to balance the budget on the backs of the middle class, on the backs of the poor, on the backs of the elderly, the sick, the children? That is the question that we have got to address right now. Yes, the deficit is a serious problem. Yes, we have got to go forward in deficit reduction, but no, in the midst of a major recession, it is morally wrong and economically bad policy to balance the budget on the backs of those people who are already hurting. And, Madam President, I find it interesting that some of the loudest voices who come before us every day talking about the serious problem of the deficit are precisely those people who have voted time after time after time to raise the deficit, raise the national debt, and now they come forward and say we have got to cut programs for the elderly, the poor, the children in order to balance the budget. Now, I suppose it turns out that I and a few others are the real deficit hawks here in the Senate. When it came to the war in Iraq, which will end up costing us some $3 trillion, I didn't hear a whole lot of discussion about how that war was going to be paid for. I voted against that war. When it came to giving huge tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country, I didn't hear my Republican friends say, oh, gee, we can't do that because it's going to drive up the deficit. I voted against tax breaks for the wealthy. When it came to pass an unfunded $400 billion Medicare Part D prescription drug program written by the insurance companies and the drug companies, didn't hear my Republican friends say about how our kids and grandchildren are going to have to pay for that. I voted against that. And, Madam President, you will recall that after the crooks on Wall Street drove this nation into a recession and they needed a bailout from the American people, I didn't hear too many of my friends who voted for that bailout say, oh, we can't do that, it's unpaid for, it's going to drive up the deficit and the national debt. I didn't hear that. But now suddenly we have people who have great concerns about the national debt and the deficit, and they intend to balance that budget on the backs of working people, the elderly, the sick, the poor, the children. And among other things, which is incomprehensible to me, at a time when approximately 16% of our people today are truly unemployed, way above the official levels, official numbers, because the official numbers do not include those people who have given up looking for work, those people who are working part-time when they want to work full-time. The Republicans come up with a deficit reduction package which will cost us some 700,000 jobs. Now, I don't know how or why in the middle of a severe recession, when unemployment is so high, you would come up with a proposal that costs 700,000 jobs. Madam President, you well know that we do an abysmal job in this country in terms of taking care of our children. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world. We have a totally inadequate early childhood education program in this country. Head Start, to the degree that it is funded adequately, does a good job. But in the midst of the crisis in early childhood education and child care, The Republican proposal would cut Head Start, one of the most important programs in America, giving low-income kids a chance to maybe get into school in the first grade and kindergarten on par with the other kids. They want to cut that program by 20% from fiscal year 2010, depriving over 200,000 little kids the opportunity not only to receive early childhood education, but health care benefits, nutrition benefits from this important program. Madam President, I worked very hard to expand community health centers in America because maybe it is a bad idea that 45,000 Americans are going to die this year because they don't get to a doctor. Pick up the papers all over America. Tens and tens of thousands of people are going to be thrown off of Medicaid. What do you do if you don't have health insurance and you're 40 or 50 years of age and you get sick? What do you do? And yet the Republican proposal would cut community health centers by $1.3 billion, denying 11 million patients access to quality primary health care. In the midst of a major health care crisis, when millions of people are uninsured, 50 million people uninsured, people being thrown off of Medicaid, you don't shut down community health centers and deny people access to health care. Madam President, in Vermont, and I'm sure in New York State, young people are finding it very, very difficult to afford college education. They're coming out of college deeply in debt. In some cases, they can't go to college. We are falling behind other countries in terms of the percentage of our young people graduating from college. And yet the Republican proposal would reduce by 17% the average Pell Grant, and 9.4 million low-income college students would lose some or all of their Pell Grants. At this moment in American history, where we are involved in an internationally global economy, with so much pressure from abroad, we've got to invest more in education, more in higher education, not less. Madam President, in the state of Vermont, the Community Services Block Grant Program provides vital service to low-income people who are in need of emergency food, emergency housing, emergency services. They do a great job. The Republican proposal would cut Community Services Block Grant by $405 million, which would harm 20 million low-income people, including millions of seniors. Lastly, there's a long list of these cuts which make no sense to me at all, but I wanted to mention a cut of $1.3 billion in the Social Security Administration. Our Republican friends say, well, we're not cutting Social Security, but they are proposing a $1.3 billion cut for the Social Security Administration, the people who administer the program. And what does that mean? Right now, there is a significant delay. If you're looking for disability benefits, huge delay. People call in my office all of the time. We can't find somebody to process our claims. And they would propose a $1.3 billion cut, which would delay Social Security benefits to about 500,000 Americans. Madam President, the issue is pretty clear. Top 1% in America earns 23% of all income, more than the bottom 50%. The wealthiest people in this country over the last 20 years have seen a reduction in the tax rates that they pay. And today, at 16%, the wealthiest people in this country are paying the lowest tax rates that the rich have paid in many, many decades. So this is not a complicated issue. The issue is, do you move forward to balancing the budget on the backs of people who are in Social Security, on the backs of little children who need Head Start, on the backs of people, seniors in the state of Vermont, who depend upon heating assistance? Do you balance the budget on the backs of the weak, the vulnerable, the elderly, or the poor? Or do you say, when we have an increasingly unequal distribution of income, rich are doing very well, do you ask the wealthiest people to start paying their fair share of taxes? The American people are pretty clear on this. They think that it is wrong to balance the budget on those people who are already hurting in a recession. Let us ask the people on top to start paying their fair share so that we could see some shared sacrifice in the midst of this recession. Madam President, with that, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.